not live, are we? No. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2.
He gets in at 7:04. He gets in at 7:04.
Okay.
ETA 7:08.
Okay.
Don't get me started. Just don't. Yeah, well. So are we actually going to start talking about
Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, we're just waiting for Andrew Wilson, who's coming from Wales right now. Well, he's now in Essex, so he's not coming from Wales now. He came from Wales at 11 a.m. and has been travelling all day. So, oh well, look at that! There is Andrew Wilson. That's like the most perfect entrance. I was explaining your journey plan and everything, your train times. Andrew Wilson in the building. There we go.
all is well. All is good in the
When
hood.
when Andrew's settled, I will start properly. So just hang on, carry on chatting.
Sorry.
Well done, Andrew. All my horrible texts.
Oh, thank you. literally right close to the town.
Okay, we are going to start now. That was brilliant. That was the best entrance for any art talk I've ever seen, ever. And it bodes well for the rest of the evening. I'm Sally Shaw. I'm the director of Firstsite. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. We are still Museum of the Year. Horniman what? It's still us, let's face it. We've got a really amazing treat this evening. We've got 3 brilliant speakers in conversation about a brilliant show with 3 brilliant artists in it. So how lucky are we? How lucky are we? Thank you very much this evening for Louisa Buck, who is a local hero of Firstsite and is a long-term family member of the Firstsite gang, and brilliant journalist, art historian, speaker, campaigner, amazingness. Louisa is well known within the art world. She's a big voice, she's an incredible character, and she's going to convene this evening's conversation so perfectly for us. We've got Andrew Wilson. We're very, very lucky to have you here on every possible level. Andrew is possibly one of the most respected and revered curators and art historians in the British art world, I would say. So we're extremely lucky to have Andrew here. And of course, James Birch, who is just the most wonderful, generous, incredible mind and long-term friend of Denis Wirth-Miller and Francis Bacon and Dickie Chopping, and also an incredible art historian and the man behind everything in the art world, as far as I can tell, for the last 40-odd years, may I say that? He's like the James Bond of the art world in my head. I was trying to explain what tonight's talk would be like on an email to some friends earlier on to encourage them to come. And I said, it's kind of like how you want art history to be. It's like the best art history lesson, where you have real, incredible stories, anecdotes, incredible knowledge, and everything coming together in one brilliant conversation. So expect gossip, expect fantastic facts, expect history, all combined into one incredible discussion. Having built it up, I'm now going to stop and hand over very happily to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Sally. No pressure there, then. The perfect evening, the perfect gossip, the perfect information, but I do have two pretty good panellists to deal it out. So I hope you've all seen this exhibition. You probably have. If you haven't, I think it's going to be open later afterwards. So it is, I mean, I've had no part in this. I'm just totally bowled over. I think it's a complete triumph. And so many congratulations to you, James, for putting it together, to getting these amazing works, winkling them out of people's collections and getting them up here and giving really an extraordinary view of Denis. It really has put Denis back, you know, in the sort of the sea, the river of art history. You know, it's established him as a substantial artist in his own right, and with a great catalogue, with an essay by Andrew too, which is really illuminating, which I should be heavily plagiarising in my questions to him. But I think, you know, it is the John Lees Turner book, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, the Visitor's book, that says, "In the shadow of Francis Bacon." What I feel about this show is that he really does step out from the shadow of Francis Bacon. I mean, Francis Bacon's still very much here, and we're going to be talking about this a lot, but I think Denis emerges as a substantial artist in his right now, thank goodness. But James, I want to really kick off with asking you, I mean, all this I'm saying now because the show is here and it's a triumph, but you know, it was a risky business. It was difficult to get these works out, to put all the jigsaw pieces together. And I just really want a little bit more background from you about why you wanted to curate this show, how you curated it, and just a little bit about the putting together of it, as it were.
Well, I think firstly, it was like to actually come across Denis Wirth-Miller and his partner at the time, Dickie Chopping, in Wivenhoe, when my parents rented a house in Fingringhoe. So Dickie and Denis, as they were called, would come over, probably not every day, but I mean certainly 3 or 4 times a week. And they were brilliant people. They were sort of, you know, for me being 5 or 6 or 7 years old, you know, they would actually invent games or have pillow fights or whatever they would do. They were just actually really entertaining and engaging. So, and then to go from Fingringhoe to Wivenhoe to see their house, the storehouse, or on the quayside,
yeah.
Quayside, it was sort of this amazing modern house, and to see these pictures hanging on the wall, it was suddenly sort of opened one up to, okay, wow, this is sort of different idea altogether, and very, well, I just found it extraordinary. I remembered it to this day, and so therefore, I wanted to curate the show because I think he hasn't had a show for years, and I did do a show.
We did that one in 2010, didn't we?
At the Minrays, but it was a smaller show, and this is actually, I mean, thanks to Firstsite, this is actually a brilliant show and brilliantly well put together by them.
But I also love the fact that you've got this personal relationship. I mean, you know, you can see from the photographs, everyone, there's a definite whiff of danger. There's a whiff of, you know, all those drunken stories, and we'll be having a few more of those. But I love the fact that Denis was your nanny, and your parents actually nicknamed him Nanny Worth Millions, punning on the... Tell a little bit about this, because, you know, it's not the most likely person you'd think of to have dandling you in the bath.
Well, it is quite extraordinary, because so Dickie and Denis, and occasionally Francis Bacon, would bath me and say to my mother, isn't that a bit odd? And she said, no, I completely trust them, darling. And there I was, bathed away by, and in fact, sorry to plug my book, in my book there is a photograph of me in the bath taken by Francis Bacon. And why is that? You know, he didn't really like children, it just happened to be a camera knocking about.
And he had that great nickname for you, Francis, didn't he?
Oh, no. At that time, I was very keen on a, I think it must have been about 1960, there was a programme on TV called Rawhide with Clint Eastwood, who was the leading actor. And I was absolutely obsessed by it. I watched it every time. I was at Rita Bix and watched Rawhide. And so much so, I was called Rawhide. Anyway, Francis Bacon said, Rawhide, that's a rather amusing name. So that was it. And in fact, I have this signed letter to Rawhide from Francis Bacon.
Well, that's a pretty good treasure. I mean, I think what's so interesting is the beginnings of Denis. I mean, the fact that, and perhaps we'll talk more about his links with Francis Bacon, you know, both being self-taught, both being outsiders. I mean, Denis, of course, it wasn't Wirth-Miller, was it? It was Wirth-Miller, his real name. His father was Bavarian. He grew up in Folkestone, not a cultured family as far as we know. He drew prolifically. I think due to the kind of the problems with the First World War and so on and such, like not much love of Germany in Folkestone at the time, went off to live up in the Lake District for a bit and got himself somehow to Manchester to work for Tootle, the designers. I mean, Andrew, it's a fascinating story, isn't it? And I mean, he began as a pretty successful designer of textiles. So to make that arc from designer to artist and this self-taught aspect, I mean, could you talk a little bit about that and just how extraordinary that was and what amazing early beginnings you see in those early works at the beginning of this exhibition?
No, I think it is. I mean, for me, it was the real discovery of becoming involved in this exhibition was this uncovering this history, this narrative of an artist who had taught himself pretty much to paint, had taught himself coming out as a designer, and you know the difference between design and fine art can be quite rigid, as well as
textiles.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, designing ties or whatever it may have been, as well as having an attention to window design as well. So it's kind of both sides of that kind of activity. But it was what I found absolutely fascinating as I explored a bit deeper, and especially going through the works that John Lees Turner has uncovered, was this sense of an artist who kind of made himself as an artist. You know, it's almost as if the idea of being an artist went alongside the idea of finding out what it is an artist could do, or what it might be the subject.
Do you mean
that he would
lifestyle,
follow.
The bohemian
well,
lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, it's on the one hand
studio,
exactly that. You know, sort of. So when he moved to London, left Tootles, was working for Tootles in London, he kind of set himself up as an artist. So how do you do that? You do it with the studio. It's Sickart's studio. It's in Fitzrovia, which is, you know, this incredible, if you like, nest of not so gentle artists, you know. And it was very much that sort of bohemian life that he was searching for. But alongside that, you can have the bohemian life and not be an artist, but he wanted to be an artist and almost in a way fashioned himself as an artist before he'd found his subject. I mean, I think that was quite clear, looking at the works that he made through the 1940s and into the early 50s. It's an artist who is finding not so much the subject, but styles. And style and subject are two very, very different things. And he was working through the styles of artists that he came to know through the sort of Fitzrovia environment. You know, artists like Yankel Adler, artists like
The two Roberts,
the two
wasn't it?
Roberts,
Yeah.
Robert Colquhoun and Robert McBride especially, John Minton. And
So
it
we're
was,
talking kind of neo-romantic
We're-
here, aren't we? We're talking bucolic, we're talking
Yeah.
neo-romantic. It's
Absolutely.
quite sort of easy viewing, for want of a better word, but very adept, bits of cubism chucked in.
Yeah.
I mean, and at this point he meets Dickie, whether he meets Dickie in this crazy garden party, whether he meets him at the Cafe Royal, or whether he meets him, who knows, when there's all these conflicting stories, but they get together. And actually they seem to find, that they're in the heart of Bohemia then. They're both shacked up in
Yeah.
Sickert's old studio. Both of them really being very diligent. Dickie was working doing theatre design, wasn't at that point, but sort of leaving that. But Denis being very disciplined, as you say, trying on all these styles, working
Yeah.
with other artists.
And it was, I mean, there's a sense in which he finds himself gravitating towards this, idea of a romantic kind of art, a romanticism that sort of can waver between, in the 1940s, thinking about a romanticism that channels an idea of Albion that's under threat, and all of those sorts of narratives.
And we've
are
got
there.
we've got the Second World War looming at this
Exactly.
point as
Well,
well.
so right in the
And
Second
Denis is
World
half
War.
German, so that's not great either, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other side of it, is if he's fashioning himself as an artist, so what does he do? He changes his name, subtly. He double barrels his name from Wirth-Miller to Wirth-Miller, but also sort of Gallicizes his name from Denis with two N's to Denis with one end, although I think it's always, I can't think anybody called him Denis, maybe.
I don't think so. But what's interesting is they both, it seems to me where they really began, both Dickie and Denis, but Denis particularly, as he's the subject of our focus tonight, they sort of found themselves more as artists and got on their way, really when they went to live and work with Cedric Morris and Arthur Let Haynes at Benton End. That seems to be, but they couldn't afford to pay the fees for the school at Benton End, with young Lucian Freud, who Denis absolutely loathed, apparently, am I right in saying? So that's
true,
when
yeah.
they kind of start finding their artistic feet, learning with Cedric and Let in that milieu with Kathleen Hale. and
Yeah,
people,
I think one of the things about Benton End, which I think is sometimes pushed to one side, and it kind of shouldn't be, because I think just, yes, Lucian Freud and Denis Wirth-Miller were sort of worst enemies, in a sense.
But this
What-
was not
why
Benton
is
End,
that?
wasn't it? This was more the
That was
pound,
later,
which
yeah.
Lucian Freud.
Yeah, but what I'm
What
trying
was that?
trying
Sorry,
to...
a bit of gossip there. I smelled a bit of gossip, which I was going to pick out.
The Cedric Morris's art school was in
At the Pound, first of all.
Stoke by Nayland, I think.
Or Higham or somewhere, wasn't it?
Yeah, that sort of
Yeah.
area. It was called the Pound, and that's when Lucian Freud was meant to drop a cigarette and the whole thing caught fire.
Yeah.
Then it moved to Benton End.
Right.
But I think that the thing that is kind of important, and especially important for an artist like Denis Wirth-Miller, who's an artist trying to find his voice, trying to find his identity, and trying to find his subject, was that the important thing that seems to come across from artists who worked with Cedric Morris and Arthur Let Haynes at the school is this sense of, yes, it's this life that is all-encompassing.
This amazing
An
oasis,
incredible
really.
oasis,
Exactly, yeah.
sort of against, anti-aestheticism, against Philistinism, all of that. And it's a way of life, a different way of life. The sexual politics are incredibly fascinating and sort of central to that. That
Talk
sense
about
of identity.
fluid. Everybody's
Yeah,
pretty fluid there,
totally
right?
fluid.
In all
But
senses.
but I think it's also this sense of what was instilled, certainly into Lucian Freud, and I think certainly into Denis Wirth-Miller in a different way, is this sense of a real work ethic as an artist, that working was really, really important. You just had to do it and keep on doing it. And that's sometimes, pushed to the side in sort of the stories of Benton End, the outrageous stories of Benton End are kind of, certainly more colourful than working hard, but, you have to have both.
But I think that's really interesting all the way through, and I'm bringing out the spectre of Francis Bacon again. I mean, all these stories about Bacon, in the colony room and everywhere else and going off and gambling, but, he was always working in his studio, up early in the morning, every single day, day in, day out. And it seems like that's what Denis was also doing as well. I mean, there's this hard graft and the fact that, and even when he and Dickie were living in the cottage before they went to the Pound or Benton End, they were, for nearly a year on their own in a cottage in the middle of nowhere, Wormingford or somewhere, working on their art every day. So it wasn't just hedonistic bohemia. No, it was a serious.
It was both.
Okay, lubricated, serious work. But I think it's interesting that that he was trying on these different styles. But his work never looked like Cedric Morris's. And I've just been to Lucian Freud. Some of you have probably been to the Lucian Freud show at the National Gallery. And Lucian Freud's work looked very like Cedric Morris while he was in Benton End. He was very influenced, but I don't see a whiff of Cedric Morris's style, which is interesting. I think.
No, I mean I totally agree with you. Yeah.
I mean, I think looking at the work through the 40s, the key influence is probably John Nash early on, and that's from Wormingford.
Sure.
But I think also, it is working through the Robert Colquhoun, Robert McBride, and the Uncle Adler. That sense of
and John Nash as well,
and John Nash, but working through that sense of trying to, I mean, what's fascinating about neo-romanticism of the two Roberts, as of Denis Wirth-Miller at that time, is these are works made during wartime. They are ostensibly grasping at an earlier idea of the landscape, but they're incredibly escapist. It's as if the war really wasn't happening. It was somewhere else. Yeah.
But then then we have enter Francis Bacon, and again, of course, much conflicting tales about did they meet at the Gargoyle Club, did they meet here, did they meet there? But he was in that milieu, that Fitzrovia tipping into Soho milieu. Definitely was also going to Benton End as well, Bacon. And, they strike up an immediate friendship, Denis and him particularly. And then, of course, we get this whole interesting issue about the role of Francis Bacon in Denis's work and Denis's work in Francis Bacon's, Denis's influence on Francis Bacon's work, which I think the traffic definitely went both ways.
Which is absolutely true. And certainly what happened in Wivenhoe and in the early 50s, and that's certainly the inspiration of Denis introducing Muybridge to
That's crucial, introducing in 1949, wasn't it?
And if you think of all Francis' paintings, whether it be dogs or people, it's all come, or people, two men lying on the grass, it's all come from Muybridge.
From those
which
Muybridge
has all come from
photographs.
Denis, which is extraordinary.
And and David Sylvester was quite sniffy, wasn't it? Going, when the dogs started to be painted, we're going to zero in on the dogs in a minute. But when the dogs started to be painted, he made some sniffy remark about saying they're rather like Francis Bacon's, but sort of done in neon. Said David Sylvester. Well, excuse me, it was actually Denis who introduced Francis Bacon to the Muybridge in the first place. So the dogs appear. I mean, they both start making dogs, painting dogs at the same time. But as you so brilliantly describe in your essay, they are both painting dogs, but they're different. In intent and also in appearance.
Yeah, I mean, the appearance of the dogs is very difficult to understand without thinking about Francis Bacon and the relationship with Denis Wirth-Miller.
And the Muybridge.
Because and Muybridge, because you look at this show and they seemingly come out of nowhere, but I think that, in a sense, though Denis's paintings of the 40s look as though the war is happening somewhere else, well, it isn't happening at all, it's no war. seemingly. I think there are some works that you see, and it's, again, very difficult to date them, but I think they're probably from the mid-40s, to prints of figures on a beach. And there's one in particular where you see there's a boat in the background, coastline, and there's this sort of slightly screaming, anguished face. And I kind of think that, in a way, that through the 1940s and towards after the war and to the end of the decade, that sense of where the predominant tendency of art was lying very much existed as sort of a tension within the world of Romanticism. And there was, on the one hand, this sort of going backwards, a sense of engaging with different kinds of newly found tradition. And on the other hand, there was a sense in which this was being worked through at a time of great pain, great suffering, the threat of nuclear holocaust, and this sense of life existing on a balancing point. And I think it's that which, for me, is the subject of Denis Wirth-Miller's work as he starts to engage. He meets Bacon in the late 40s, and by 1953, he evolves these paintings.
They are like
of a running dog.
Almost.
They are hell. They're coming. They
come.
They emerge. They come out of a void.
Out of nothing. Yeah.
Out of absolute nothing. They come out of Muybridge in one sense, but they totally transcend them, and they transcend them in a very interesting way because Muybridge's photographs of humans and animals in motion. They are this scientific, dispassionate images of animals moving, men wrestling, whatever it may be, people walking, going up steps, down steps, and dogs running, leaping. And what I think Denis Wirth-Miller is groping at in these paintings, and finds, I think, quite really successfully, is this sense of taut existence, this sort of evanescence of life, evanescence of being. It's sort of brutal, and it's immediate, and it's gone.
And it's energetic, though. They're like balls of energy, those dogs, aren't they?
True.
Yeah, I mean, they come out of the void. And thinking about how Francis Bacon's paintings of dogs, he did a group of dog paintings in 1952. One of them is in the exhibition here. These are dogs staged. They're staged in a certain space to give tension to an idea of isolation. This is
existential dogs.
It's sort of existential dogs in a way, and they're painted in a very, very different way as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Bacon's dogs are painted with broad brushstrokes. There's a sort of tracery to the way in which Denis's paintings sort of evoke both the musculature and the skin, the fur of the dog in a very kind of almost crystalline kind of way.
They're kind of abstract, they're kind of crosshatchy, aren't they, some of them? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lattice of paint, it's a very different kind of paint.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in them both working together. I mean, Bacon famously, I mean, boy, has the studio ever been more mythologized than his? I think not, but it was the place he went to on his own. Okay, he might have had some sort of grapplings and some bad behaviour in there, but when he was actually working, he was doing it on his own. He worked on his own famously. People didn't see him work, except Denis. I mean, Denis was the only person, as far as I know, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but who actually Bacon worked with. They worked together. I mean, that dog painting that belongs to you, maybe even Bacon painted the tail, who knows? The fact they actually physically worked together, that's kind of extraordinary for both of them, that relationship.
He certainly didn't like people coming in there. I mean, I think he let John Edwards come in occasionally, but that he really didn't want him around and wanted to be completely by himself, understandably.
Yeah. I mean, the relationship between Bacon and Denis was fascinating. I think it's sort of fascinating beyond identifying who painted what.
That's you're never really going to know.
I mean, you'll never really know. There are some paintings that we know by Bacon that Denis had a hand in.
Sure.
And it's potentially possible the it happened the other way round. But I think much more.
Well, except we know the other way around, because
Yeah,
from the Tate Gallery retrospective, it does say there's a comment in what
He told Ronald Alley, didn't he?
Yeah,
He actually
he
said in
that-
terms Bacon to
actually,
Alley.
for Francis to say,
Yeah.
actually, Denis Wirth-Miller did all the cross-hatching.
Yeah.
Of,
But I was thinking the other way around, being Francis working on Denis's paintings.
he wouldn't say that,
Who
would he?
knows? Who knows?
He wouldn't say
But
that.
I
In fact,
think,
they
but I,
needed each other so bad. The Bacon really
They-
needed
that absolutely
Denis.
they
He'd come
did,
down
yeah.
come down to the storehouse all the time. Summoned him to Tangier.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and I think that, I mean, you know, the correspondence between them seems to suggest a real. It's not. It's a need which is about the work. It's about the art rather than a, you know, sort of bohemian need, if you like.
I mean, they get hammered together and
yeah,
beat each
totally.
other up and go gambling together and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But it seems like didn't they?
Or they'll go to see, say, for example, Jasper Johns and the Hayward, and then come back and say, this is rubbish, and have lunch and get pissed.
But I think the art. It was talking about art. Was
Yeah, and that's what they really
a key
enjoyed.
part.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did they ever have any kind of romantic situation at all, the two of them? Sorry to be base and gossipy, but
I mean, they might have done something, but a
drunken
long time
moment,
ago.
nothing,
But
yeah.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think it's interesting also, because then we bring in the landscape. I mean, the storehouse looking over the estuary and the Essex landscape, and of course, you know, I think she was in the Zandra Rhodes, John Lees Turner conversation. A lady asked a question saying, I was constantly looking at these Francis Bacon, you know, marsh landscapes and putting them in my own work. And I looked, now I'm in this show, I see they all come from Denis, and that's not possibly quite true. But you know, the marsh landscape as well in Bacon's work seems to be a crucial aspect of, and indeed Bacon, you know, maybe even having Denis paint some of his.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice to talk about that, just how the landscape coming, because Bacon was down here a lot.
Yeah.
This is quite an existential landscape. Sorry to be a bit
Yeah.
crass about it. So it does sort of chime with Bacon's work anyway, but I think it became very important, didn't it?
I mean, it's odd that the way in which Bacon sort of also disparaged landscape in a way, and yet it is such a major part of his work. You know, it's like he was looking for different kinds of stages, and the landscape round Wivenhoe is one kind of stage in a way, that sense of marshland. And, you know, I mean, he did say that, you know, art is an obsession with life, and that, you know, sort of the greatest obsession is with ourselves as human beings, and then the obsession is with animals, and then the obsession is with landscape. And I kind of think that, you know, for Bacon, the landscape becomes a stage for other obsessions. You know, his obsession maybe isn't with landscape, it's with what it can do, how it can offer up a kind of this psychological charge, if you like. What is odd about Denis Wirth-Miller is that on the one, you know, he spends a very clear, you know, 2 years, year and a half maybe, painting dog paintings. And then there's a period of maybe a year or so in which there's this sort of transition happening within his work. He's trying to move things forward, you know, sort of the dog becomes much more humanoid.
There's a really strange
really,
kind of hybrid
really,
creature in one
really
of his
odd,
works,
yeah.
isn't there? Which is part dog, part human.
Yeah.
Quite Bacon-y, or you could say Bacon has been quite Wirth-Miller-y at this point. Who knows? But Bacon never did that hybrid man-beast thing. I mean, men might have been bestial, but they weren't kind of.
I mean, there's a sort of
dog-like.
sort of brute masculinity in works like that, which are really kind of which turn the dog as a subject somewhere else entirely. But then suddenly, as if suddenly, the subject moves to landscapes.
Why
And
do we
that
think?
is really
Well, that was what, 1956, I think he changed, didn't he, to
55,
landscape?
55,
Do we know?
56, yeah.
You knew him really well. You've studied him really closely. Why do you think that happened? Why did the dogs? I mean, there's few transitional periods, but it seems odd that the figure just completely left the building, as it were, at that point. To me, I mean,
I mean, it is in a way it's difficult to understand. I mean, one theory might be that the dog as a subject was too close to Bacon, and you know, sort of the push may be, you know, don't tread on my patch, in a sense.
Even though I've given you that.
Yeah,
Even I gave you the patch in the first place.
yeah, it's like
reversed.
take. But I, you know, and that's one theory. I think that the other theory is kind of looking for a subject where sort of that sense of visceral abjectness can be summoned up. That, you know, the dog is brute animal abject force personified, and try and see that in a more pervasive way in the environment around
I mean, they're not calm landscapes,
They're not
are
at
they?
all.
They're
Not
not.
at
It's
all.
not. He's not having a little neo-romantic, bucolic moment here. I mean, they are full of, you know, foreboding.
and they're unpeopled as well. It's as if, you know, the sorts of emotional charge that you would find from a figure, say, that you find in Bacon's figures, is something that, you know, it would be a really fantastic, as an artist thinking this through, to actually be able to summon up such a similar charge in landscape alone. And the early landscape paintings of Denis Wirth-Miller, there were, I think, at least three, which are paintings of a figure in a landscape.
Oh, really?
And I mean, I have never seen
Have you not
seen
seen
them.
Where are they? Are they lost?
Who knows? Lost.
Anybody in the audience who
Please,
knows?
please.
Put the word out.
And it's just that sense of you move from the dog maybe as a surrogate human figure. You know, it's sort of the obsession of the figure becomes an obsession with the animal, which becomes an obsession with the figure again, half animal, half beast, half man. Move the figure into the landscape and then wash the figure out, because the landscape can contain all of that
Almost
force.
absorbs it.
Yeah.
Absorbs that energy. I mean, I'm using the word energy again, because one looks at the way his execution.
They're not tranquil paintings.
No, and I mean the way he makes the paint work, the etching through. I mean, just the technique is extraordinary, and I'd love to watch him paint. You know, it must have been. You never. I mean, you never know nothing along those lines. But then at the same time, so he and Dickie. Absolutely together, living. And of course, let's not forget Dickie's a Colchester boy. I mean, his dad was, I think, mayor of Colchester at one point, wasn't he, James? If I remember rightly.
No, I don't know.
I think he had. Well, anyway, he had mills, owned mills nearby. Colchester boy. There they are, living, you know, as a gay couple in plain sight, very tempestuously. Many people coming down, but also both of them loving the landscape. Dickie, of course, making a name for himself, famously with Ian Fleming, and let's not forget that it was Francis Bacon that introduced Dickie to Anne Fleming. So Bacon, although he was a kind of thorn in the relationship between Dickie and Denis, sort of also helped out as well. But Dickie and Denis, I mean, you were saying, James, you know, they loved to walk in the landscape. They made a beautiful garden at the storehouse. You know, Dickie was illustrating botanical books and
absolutely,
you know,
but the one thing I went to see Dickie in his hospice, my sister here, and he said one of the worst things that ever happened was Francis introducing him to Anne Fleming.
Really?
He said that was the worst thing that ever happened.
Why?
Those fabulous illustrations. He couldn't stand it because that was it.
How he got known? You mean he got labelled?
And that was it. He couldn't do anything else. And if you remember some of Dickie's paintings, sort of towards before he stopped painting, he did sort of strange sort of muffins with a cherry on top or a donut, which weren't really great.
Well, he wrote a lot too, didn't he?
And he wrote The Fly.
Yeah.
And all. So there they were, both of them loving the landscape. You said they used to walk a lot. They went walking and in nearby.
Absolutely. Oh yes, I was telling you about the Tattingston Wonder.
Yeah, I know nothing of the Tattingston Wonder, but
Tattingston, which is in Suffolk, there was this Tattingston Hall, and from Tattingston Hall, the person who ever lived there, there was a sort of farmer's cottage, and he didn't like that, so he made a folly of it. It had a sort of church tower.
I want to go and see immediately.
And Dickie and Denis, I remember coming they went to visit it, and they came back by my parents' house.
Two mums. So, I mean, they remained very much presences throughout your teens,
my whole,
your family life, all the way through.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I remember late going to the storehouse for some amazing drunken lunches and all of us jumping into the water on the quayside. But it was quite crazy then. I mean, it was volatile and it was quite exhausting. And Denis was, very unpredictable, to put it mildly.
Well, see, I quite like Denis.
So
because of that reason, actually. But a lot of people, let's put it another way, a lot of women liked Dickie, and they thought he was wonderful.
But he was so charming.
But see, Denis was very funny, though, in the same way. But there was actually, I was sent this diary entry that John Lees Turner said, that Mary Lemley, who's in the audience, and I went for lunch, and they came at 12 o'clock and left at 3 in the morning, after 7 bottles later. And that's nothing.
Small beer.
Exactly.
But just to go back to the paintings, again.
Sorry.
So what's interesting is another bane. Okay, so if Ian Fleming and Anne Fleming were banes of Dickie's life, one could argue that David Hicks, the interior designer, being such a champion of Denis, having his works as the key part to every fashionable interior in the early 60s, was not great for Denis either in a respect, because it didn't help his work that it became part of the fixtures and fittings and the decor, perhaps.
I think that was a part in a way, Denis slightly receding from view, critical view.
Yeah.
Because, absolutely. Anything brutal, animalistic, anything slightly transgressive is going to be pushed into oblivion by sort of tasteful, gold-framed interior decor, and also a sort of sense of being, if not part of, at least a decoration for a kind of establishment sort of way of life, which, again, is, in a way, is completely counter to the paintings themselves, but somehow they got absorbed into it.
It could neutralise.
Yeah, and it's...
Did he ever talk about it at all?
No.
About...
Never mentioned it.
Because, of course, it was success in terms of finance. I mean, it paid the bills.
For sure.
But maybe he, knocked out a few
in
too
fact,
many.
I suppose the last days I'd go to the New Art Centre, which was a gallery in Sloane Street.
Yeah.
And I was actually thinking about this, strange enough, when I was there, thinking of Andrew in the sense, was that there was this rather amazing-looking lady who was there, and she said, she sort of came up to me and said, introduced herself, and I said, Denis here, I know Denis. I said, who are you? She said, I'm Louise. I said, okay. And I have a lesbian club in Soho, which I went to, and there, lo and behold, was the Sex Pistols and Malcolm McLaren, because that's where they hung
Louise's.
out. Yeah, exactly, Louise's. So Denis did another sort of tick point.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. They got around, these
They
guys.
certainly did.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it is, and of course, so he's making these paintings. They're very fashionable, but they ain't pop art. They're not transgressive. They're kind of a bit quaint, really, by the time you get to the end of the 60s.
I don't think they're quaint, but they are kind of presented as quaint by the
context.
company they keep. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah,
That's it's and at that point, in a way, it's almost as if ships passing. It's like he's out of step with prevailing mood.
Well, also,
and a different generation.
And they're getting old. It's a different generation. Hey ho, we can all drink to that.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I think what of course has entered the mythology and the story is the famous exhibition of Denis's in 1977 at the Wivenhoe Arts Club, when he'd been having a very difficult time. He'd been struggling with his painting. Bacon had been coming to the studio at the storehouse at Dickie's request to help him out of the hole, to help him get painting again. I think he cut his finger really badly, and then it healed up. It was a big drama, but he got the work done. He got it made. in the Wivenhoe Arts Club, Francis Bacon comes down and looks at the show that he's done so much, indirectly to support, and tell the story, James, because it's a devastating story.
The Wivenhoe Arts Club, which doesn't exist anymore, but it's up a hill in Wivenhoe, and my mode of transport then was a Messerschmitt bubble car, so it couldn't actually get up the hill, so I parked it on the side and tried to thumb a lift, which I was thumbing a lift from somebody called George Gale, who actually put the Wivenhoe Arts Club together. And he went, fuck off. And so anyway, it wasn't summer of 76 or 70, it was quite hot in 77. Anyway, staggering up this hill to go into this sort of building.
The big show that you were
big
waiting
show,
for.
which would have nothing on the wall. All been smashed up by Denis the night before.
And why did it have been smashed up? Why?
Because Francis said it was rubbish.
Francis turned up, did he not, for an early viewing?
Yeah.
I think there was some friends around or something, according to John's book, I don't know, but there were some friends around, a few people, but it was like an early viewing, and he came down totally smashed, drunk, and just raw with laughter and made terrible deprecating remarks about all the work, and it was just the most awful story, and you said Denis destroyed them all, or nearly all of them. I think a few got away.
I mean, it was quite shocking, really.
Terrible.
I mean, because he was expected to go into a room to see pictures. I didn't really register that this was always going on, this sort of destruction, even with Francis.
Was Denis there at this in the empty room?
I can't remember, to be honest. Because
Everybody was kind of wondering what was going on, I guess, because they all.
Well, I think by the time I got up there, and George Gale probably then realised I was coming to the Wivenhoe Art, he did say, "Can I get you a drink?"
We all needed one at this point.
Staggering up the hill.
But I mean, the story goes that that Denis destroyed the work. He had one more show at Hintlesham Hall, and there's a couple of works in this exhibition that date the next year, 78. One of those you'll go in one day to 78, another one I think, but only 2 works in the show that from after the famous watershed moment. And he said his eyesight was going. He said it was like looking through lace. He couldn't really see. But we all kind of think perhaps that was the final breaking of the spirit, perhaps.
I mean, I think
what do you think?
It's also kind of weird as well, thinking about, you mentioned, well, Bacon had indirect, effect, support for Denis, sort of leading up to that show. I mean, there is a diary entry where, Denis was really struggling with one painting in particular. He was struggling with painting full stop. And it's before the 77 show, but the same year, that year. And Bacon supposedly came and painted a sky for him. So to have then helped him to that degree and then said, well, the whole lot's fucking rubbish, it's not worth looking at, is really shocking.
But that's that typical.
But then it goes with the whole masochistic kind of sadist
total sadism.
Yeah,
because
it's his sadism, and maybe Denis masochist. I don't know.
Because I think I probably told you that I was like walking down Dean Street one afternoon, and suddenly Francis Bacon and Denis Wirth-Miller were walking along, and they said, "Oh, hello, James. Do you want to come up and have a drink in the colony room?" I said, certainly, okay. But then Denis took me aside saying, listen, James, just abuse me. I said, oh, Denis, I can't abuse it. Just abuse me in front of Francis. I said, no, I can't do that. He said, just do it. I said, okay. So I was sitting next door to Denis on this banquette. Francis had his back to us on the bar stool. And so Denis nudged me. I said, okay, Denis, you're absolutely complete blank. Whereupon Francis span round and said, you always have been. And then the whole conversation then continued. So having abused Denis, then Francis joined in the conversation.
Ooh, I think that's very chilling.
No, I think it went on and on and on. I mean, yeah.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's sort of, in a sense, chilling. You think that, Denis destroyed the work in the show. He stopped painting for whatever reason, but, triggered by this, and certainly it's a good reason to give, but then sort of continued being so close or still close to Bacon. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, they had the longest lasting friendship pretty much of anybody that Bacon of Bacon's circle, and that is
Which is amazing.
Well, I think it's also interesting that Bacon fell out with his friends when they became successful artists. He fell out with Lucian Freud, he fell out with Graham Sutherland. I mean, not that the Wivenhoe Arts Club is the kind of pinnacle of success, but, you know, there was a sense of perhaps just not... and a kind of cussedness, I guess. I mean, we're never going to know, are we? But I think what's so interesting, I'm aware that time is ticking on. I'm sure there's lots of questions that you want to ask these two. We've got them in our clutches, knowing their work as closely as they do. But I mean, I do think, you know, it's this, you know, Bacon's sabotage and indeed support, who knows, notwithstanding, this is a really substantial show, you know. And I think the legacy, I mean, I'd like you to, because, you know, former director of, you know, collections at Tate Britain, British collections, you know about shaping careers, trajectories of careers, assessing people. I mean, it seems to me that the legacy really is, you know, now established as something substantial. What do you, I mean, how would you assess him now as, in terms of the history of art and his legacy in the view of this show?
Well, I mean, I think this show is quite remarkable in the way that it does place Denis Wirth-Miller's work right at the forefront of British art in the post-war era. It's sort of the way it doesn't just connect and reflect, it sort of leads as well. I mean, I think that the dog paintings are quite extraordinary sort of evocations of sort of life out of joint at that time in the early 50s, when, you know, sort of could have gone so many different ways. And the engagement with the landscape tradition that basically is the greater part of his career is, you know, it's kind of unparalleled, actually. Thinking about landscape painting of the second half of the 20th century in Britain, it stands apart. It really
agree.
does.
I mean, he's got a voice, hasn't he?
Yeah.
A voice that, unlike any other. And also one thinks the Norwich School, Constable, Turner, you know, the British landscape tradition. In a way, he's picked up that baton and taken it into a kind of another post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear age.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that, and done it with a real attention to place, particular places, you know, whether identifiable or not. You know, I know where I feel I am when I'm looking at his paintings. But doing that in a way is, I think, to do that with unpeopled landscapes, and to and so summon up other emotions within you through, you know, what are fairly abstracting ways of mark making as well is really remarkable. And you know, it's also kind of remarkable and shameful that you know, his work is still so little known. And I really hope this show sort of pushes forward and makes that, you know, less easy to ignore.
I mean, you knew him, James. What do you think he'd feel about this?
I think he'd be delighted. I mean, probably he would have started off being embarrassed, but then he would have come round to it, and he would have liked it. I mean, but it's extraordinary to think that I don't think the Tate Gallery has a Denis Wirth-Miller in its collection.
Not one.
No, which is quite odd.
Gregor Muir was done here, wasn't he? Up here with the company. So let's hope he'll be sniffing around and making a purchase or two. I think this is a good moment now to ask anybody in the audience if you'd like to ask any questions. There's going to be a roving mic, so wave your arm. Stuart at the back is waving the mic. So anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Well, we've got these two in our clutches for a little while. Oh, one sec. Yep. I'm next.
I think the thing that probably most of us are wondering is does anybody know what those paintings in 1977 were? Were they more landscapes? Were they more challenging? Is there any documentation?
1977, there would have still been landscapes, because in 1978, when he stopped painting, and I did see this show at Hindlesham Hall in the summer, and there were still the landscapes, so there would have been landscapes at that time.
Yeah, so it wasn't that Francis Bacon had pushed him into an area subject matter that was different?
No.
Okay.
It was just one of those typical sort of fights, this alcoholic
But
fight.
was he then there at the... Sorry, I'll let somebody else ask a question in a minute. But was he then there in 78 at the Hintlesham Hall show,
Yes,
Francis
he was.
Bacon?
Yes, it was.
Ah.
Well,
As if nothing had happened.
As if nothing had happened, but all I remember is he passed out on the lawn like that. Went collapsed. Doing.
Oh, really? I think Sonia in the front was...
Did they have any relationship at all with the Bardfield artists, which were quite a strong school at the same time? Or did they just ignore them? I mean, they weren't strong.
I mean, I'm sure they would have known. I mean, maybe... Yeah, I mean, they would have known Michael Rothenstein and yeah, definitely. I would imagine Edward Borden, but I don't think their paths crossed in a sort of close way at all. I think it's more separation of different part of Essex, I guess.
True. Well, it's quite odd in the sense that the connection with them with John Nash, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of John Nash's work, it's very good, but I mean, it's sort of completely different from Dennis's.
It is.
Did they remain friendly with Cedric and Let right the way through?
I don't know.
Don't know that either.
Don't know.
How important was his sexuality in his work, do you think? When I look at the dog paintings and the wrestlers, I see a strong kind of evocation of a kind of sexuality.
I think it's really clear in the dog paintings that these are male dogs. I think they're a real, as I said, sort of expression of brute animal masculinity. I think there's some of the drawings, not necessarily the paintings, which I think are fairly ambiguous as to whether that part dog, part man. I think there are a couple where it's the front of the musculature of the front legs of the dog almost become like the arms and shoulders of a man, sort of lifting himself up. But then also thinking about how those transitional paintings are very much, again, engaging with that idea of masculinity, and which then, is sort of quite blatantly so, with the painting of the wrestlers and the single figure of the wrestler.
That hybrid dog man squatting.
Yeah. I mean, I think there, sort of the Dennis's sexuality is pretty clearly out on view, and it's right. One that whether it's sort of sadism or masochism is there entwined within it.
It's not sweet and romantic, is it?
No.
But then thinking about the landscape paintings, I think it's very hard to say.
Well, there's a lot of energy and passion and
there
action
is,
and drama, and I mean, they're tempestuous, aren't they?
But as soon as you move away from the figure so completely as an image, it is difficult to say. But yes, there's certainly the emotions within these paintings. The storm-filled, desolate, sort of windswept marshland, or
red rain coming down.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, hand up here.
Sorry. Hello. You were saying that what Denis would have made of this exhibition. I was wondering what Francis would have made of this exhibition.
Very good point.
Good
might not be here.
Would he have shown up? Yes, that would have been
exactly.
I mean, we were worrying about Andrew, but we knew he was on his way.
seas.
I mean, it is a thought, isn't it?
It is a thought.
I mean, that whole history of terrible things happening at big exhibitions. I mean, obviously one thinks of George Dyer with Bacon with his great Grand Palais show, and somebody else died just before another one of his shows. I seem to remember.
Peter Lacey.
Peter Lacey,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, they're these sort of lightning rods. I think, yes, I'm rather glad that Francis Bacon is not around to be messing up the evening.
I was wondering whether Dickie and Denis went to London and hung out in the Colony Room and went to, as part of it, or was their friendship mostly based with Francis here?
Well, as I said, I would see Denis with Francis when I had a gallery in Soho. This was like the late 80s. They would come to the Colony Room and say, come and have a drink. Dickie, not so much, but certainly, I mean, well, my sister's also in the audience. Dickie would take her out to various clubs in London. So,
we used to go to Madame Jojo's with Dickie. We'd go dancing with Dickie and Madame Jojo's. God, what a brilliant dancer he was. And Denis would go off gambling at Charlie Chester's.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Dickie was teaching at the Royal College
and Dickie was teaching at the Royal College.
And
big friends with Sandra Rhodes, of course.
Exactly, and doing the whole sort of dressing up as Cinderella.
And I've got some great pictures of Dickie in drag too. Yeah, I mean, he did.
Me too.
Well, on that stirring note,
I think
there's
there was-
another question.
hang on,
Sorry,
there's
another
one question at the
sorry,
front.
Sorry.
Oh.
Another question at the front.
There's another. Hang on a second.
Oops, sorry. Stuart's
one at-
running around here.
I've got one at the back as well. After this.
One at the back, that's all right.
Oh, hi. It's James. Hello. I was wondering about your personal feelings about, you put on the show in Moscow.
Yeah.
And arranged all of that, and Francis seems to have been sort of deciding on and off whether he was going to attend or not. What your personal feeling was when he didn't attend, because he would have been probably led down a path of all of this bureaucracy and being pushed and pulled by the Russians and the English to do things that he probably wouldn't have wanted to. So were you, in a way, glad that he didn't go, or were you very sad that he didn't go?
I really wanted him to come. I mean, this was like this whole thing on and off, and it was driving me nuts. And no, I wish he had gone. And but the final thing was that he didn't, and that was the great sadness, because it would have been a completely different exhibition. He was there. I mean, even then, it was quite difficult to get film crews to come out to film him going to attending his exhibition in Moscow. So it's a very weird time. So I was very sad, and I think he was too at the end of the day.
Would have been fun with him with the Russians.
Yes.
Drunk them all under the table, probably.
Why did Bacon leave nothing to Wirth-Miller in his will? It just seems mean-spirited in the extreme.
Well, you're absolutely correct, because I mean, this is a typical sort of Bacon-esque sort of situation. So Denis was desperately wanted to be painted by Francis Bacon.
Only once, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. No, what did he do? He painted Dickie Chopping.
Painted Dickie, yes.
So that, and then he gave it to Dickie and Denis, whereupon they sold it. And this would have been in the late 70s, 80s, and which was, you know, I think it was, I can't remember if it was a double image or a triptych, but anyway, it would have been worth very little compared to what it would be now.
Whoa. So that was mean then, wasn't it?
Well,
I mean, because he painted so many of his friends.
It's typical
and this was his
Francis.
oldest friend, the one he
Exactly.
relied upon.
Exactly.
It's so complicated and strange, isn't it?
Yeah. Perverse.
Well, that's probably rather a good note to end on, unless there's another complicated, strange and perverse, but endlessly fascinating. Thank you both so much.
Thank
That was
you.
really so illuminating.
And Louisa, if I can thank you as well, and thanks to people that are watching at home as well. The galleries will stay open. We're going to clear away the chairs, of course, and get rid of all the microphones. But you know, you don't have to dash off. The bar, the cafe is still open as well, and the other exhibitions. The exhibition, if you have to dash off tonight, and actually if you're watching from home and you haven't seen the show yet, it runs until the 22nd of January. We're open for much of Christmas. We've also got, within our cinema programme as well, we put a couple of films in there that are that resonate with the show, so do check that out. For everyone here as well, I think we've got a Cheerio goodie bag that's at the front and that you can take with you. Also, James, you said you're happy to then sign books.
Certainly, yeah.
Of your fabulous book, and
Great
also
read, recommended.
Yeah, and then also of the publication that we made of this show as well.
Excellent essay.
Excellent essays. They're available to buy, and also and if you're at home, they're available to buy online too. That's it. Thanks so much. Thanks again for coming. We'll see you soon. Good night.